Moonlight tastes of metal on Harry's tongue as a cold ring slides into his palm, an old, whispering weight that answers to a scar meant for another enemy. He knows the shape of danger by habit, a tightness in the chest, a little hot needle at the brow, the sudden memory of faces you have not thought to name. This is different. This weight reaches deeper, as if reaching for missing things he has not yet named. The hedgerow where he stands framed him like a foreign page, thick green leaves rimed with frost, earth smelling of peat and smoke, and a sky so full of stars it seems to press its cold against his skin. No owl had announced the night, no castle lights lay behind him. He had come, without departing, to some other place that borrowed the moonlight of his world and kept the bones of its own. Silence answered him first, and then a voice without a mouth. The ring spoke not in words so much as in suggestion, a slow, easy rolling of possibility that slid along his nerves and made the muscles of his hands tighten. It promised shelter for those he loved. It offered a shield against fear, a sharpness to cut away the things that stalked him in dreams. Those promises came with a sweetness he knew too well. He had been taught early that such sweetness saved nothing, that it baited the heart till it bled. Still, the promise warmed him like a hearth fire in a cold hall. He remembered faces, bright and earnest, friends who had bled for him, those who would not survive another season of war, and a blank hunger opened in him that wanted nothing more than a means to keep them safe. Harry had learned many arts to answer fear. He had learned that names matter. He had learned to make light where there was none, to call friends from the dark, and to stand beneath a storm without flinching. Spells had straightened bones, stitched flesh, drawn courage anew from hands that trembled. But these were acts performed with the certainty of the world's rules. This ring bowed the world's rules into shapes he did not recognize. When he looked upon it, he felt the tug of other histories, rivers and mountains he had never seen, halls of stone gone to ash and green, a shadow called by a name not his to speak. The scar upon his brow prickled as if some other hand brushed it, and that foreign memory, older than a schoolyard fear, answered like an echo, and the echo wanted him to listen. He tried to draw his wand. His fingers closed and found not the wood he knew, but a broken twig wet with moss. The ritual of wand work felt silly here, the motions too small for the gravity of that circle and stone. For the first time he understood how a thing could be both simple and ruinous. The ring was a tool as plainly as any knife, and yet it wrapped itself around purpose until the purpose was no longer the man's. He thought of spells meant to tether and to bind, and he thought of a charm cast in a darkened room that had once tried to make him obey. The ring's voice did not thunder. It was not like the hiss of the darkest curses he had known. It was paper-soft and patient, repeating the same gentle phrase until the heart that listened forgot to argue. Feet stirred in the undergrowth. A man stepped out, not rushing but as one who would not be turned aside by surprise. He wore gray, a cloak that had seen rain and long roads, and he leaned upon a staff older than some memories. His face creased with both mirth and the grave cares of a long life. His eyes found the ring like iron finds its old magnet, and for a moment his mouth was a thin line. "You have come far, boy, from another kind of world," he said, and his voice was like moss on stone, full of patience and knowledge that did not boast. He did not demand the ring. He did not brandish a claim. He looked at Harry as one takes measure of weather. Harry answered by holding the ring up, palm trembling. He felt foolish, a child's gesture, and he felt an ancient dignity, too, like a king accidentally caught barefoot. The man, Gandalf, the name arrived with the rustle of leaves, an old certain thing, took a step closer and did not touch. He studied Harry's face as a scholar might pry at an inscription. "It answers to you," Gandalf said softly, as if speaking to the moon. "I had not thought such a bridge could be made. Many things are found between worlds, but seldom a bearer who walks both paths." There was no mockery in Gandalf's tone. There was only the long, slow weighing of futures. He set down the question the way one sets a tool on a table, simple and sharp. "Do you know what that is you carry?" he asked. The ring did not cry out at the name. It did not need to. It let the bones of the question rest upon Harry's tongue. He could have told the man everything he knew. He could have admitted the taste of metal. But confession is not always the same as trust. Instead, Harry only said, "It promised me safety. For them." His voice was small, but there was an iron in it. The words named his compass more truly than any speech would have done. Gandalf's hand went unconsciously to his beard, and his eyes went, like a watchful bird's, to the scar on Harry's forehead. "Sacrifices were made," he said. "Wounds mark us in many ways. But there are snares older than any you have yet faced. This ring, its history is long, and it remembers kings and ruin. It will tell you such things as it thinks will bind you wholly to it." His voice was plain then, with that slow ache of someone who had seen men take a short comfort for a long sorrow. "Power to save is a temptation the world uses to make slaves. It will promise you the safety of those you love, and it will ask for your freedom in return." Harry looked at the ring again. In that small, polished circle, he saw not only promises but images, a black throne, a sea of flags, and then, softer, faces by a fire that would not burn, faces he loved, safe and warm. A flick of thought showed. Him, his scar as a doorway, a path by which something else might touch him. He thought of the lessons older than his training, of the way power had once used him as a symbol, of the friends who had stood in the storm because his hand had steadied them. He felt a single, sharp want to keep them from ever feeling that cold again. "You have carried things before," Gandalf said, seeing the struggle like a map. "You know what it is to be marked, but this is no mere mark. It is a key and a lock both, and it seeks to fit itself to the heart that holds it." He paused, and the knight leaned closer. "Tell me, what will you do with it?" The question made the hedgerow around them breathe. Harry's first thought was to put it away, to hide it where none could find it. His second thought was to take it to the wise and let them decide. His third thought, fierce and sudden, was to keep it, to make of it an instrument he could wield. That thought tasted of iron and wine, it tasted of lines kept safe, and of promises held fast against a world that could betray them at any second. He saw himself standing between two groups of people, both fragile, both in need, and believed his hands could hold them steady. Gandalf watched him, not as a judge, but as a man seeing a choice he could not make for another. "Many will ask to take it from you," he warned, and his words carried a quiet urgency. "Many minds will say what is right and what is wrong. Some will advise you out of fear, others out of love. The ring will speak too, and it will flatter you. It will make you think that the ends justify the means." He looked up at the stars. "There is a road to be walked where counsel is needed. I would see you to those who remember the old names. There are halls where this thing may be judged fairly, and others who will tell you the truth without flattery." Harry pictured them. Councils in candlelight, elders who had seen the rise and fall of kings, words spoken like hammers shaping steel. His mind sought a course to follow, a safety net to catch him if he fell. But his feet had no sure way to reach those halls. He did not know the maps of this country, nor the politics of men who had never heard of Azkaban or the Ministry. He felt very small beneath the weight of the ring, and very large with a dangerous hope that perhaps, with knowledge and force, he could change the terms of its bargain. Outside the hedgerow, a wind moved along the fields and carried a scent of distant smoke. From somewhere unseen came a faint sound, a horn, hollow and long, that set the hairs on the back of Harry's neck on edge. The sound spoke of war like a slow drumbeat. It was not the first portend tonight, and it would not be the last. Gandalf's expression sharpened. "You cannot keep it hidden forever," he said. "There are eyes that travel roads faster than any horse. If you bear it, you make a target of all that you love. If you hide it, you may doom it to be found by those who would use it gladly. The world is not divided cleanly between those who could be trusted and those who cannot." The ring pulsed once in Harry's palm, a small, warm thing like a heartbeat. For an instant he saw a road folding into itself, a narrow black wound through the world that led to a mountain whose face leaked lightless fire. It called to him in a tongue older than any lesson. He felt a fierce clarity then, like the edge of a blade. He could not hand the thing to those who would judge without risk, nor could he bear it carelessly. He had passed through doorways made of curses before. He believed he could withstand a temptation that whispered safety. That belief was a thin reed against a great wind, yet it was enough to make a plan. "I will keep it," he said, and the words startled even him by their steadiness. They were not arrogant, they were not defiant. They were pledged like the quiet click of a lock. "I will carry it away from others. I will not give it as a tool for someone else to use." The admission was a vow and a trap, both. Gandalf's face did not soften. He only nodded, as if he had expected such an answer and had prepared 1,000 counter-moves. "Then we must go," Gandalf said. "There are paths that lead to safety in council, and dangers that must be met with care. You have chosen a road, Harry Potter, that very few have walked willingly. The West remembers many things, and there are hearts there that will not be heedless. But this thing you carry will tempt them as much as it tempts you. Know that if you walk with it, you will make enemies of those who seek it, and you will carry a burden that grows heavier the longer it is borne." Harry looked at his own hands, at the thin scars and calluses, at the band that had once been used to tie his school robes. The ring sat on his palm like a small, indifferent moon. He felt the gravity of his choice set into bone, and he felt the dangerous lightness of hope as well. "Then teach me the roads," he said. "Teach me the signs. I will not be a fool about it." Gandalf smiled once, and it was like a sliver of dawn. "Then rise, Ringbearer," he said, and the words fell around them like proverbs. "We have no time to waste. The world turns, and shadows do their work in small hours. You have another enemy, boy, whose teeth are cold and patient. This task will call for more than courage. It will call for cunning, and for those whom you can trust. We must find allies, swift feet, and a place to be judged rightly." They moved then out of the hedgerow and into a night that smelled of wet stone and old leaf mold. Harry tucked the ring inside his tunic, feeling it warm against his skin like a foreign ember. The movement of his body made the ring whisper at him in syllables of protection and dominion. He pressed his hand over it to quiet the voices. The silence that followed was uneasy and thin, like mouse fur. But it held long enough. As they set their feet upon a path that wanted to lead them westward, Harry felt the scar on his brow ache with a new kind of knowing. It was as if two enemies had turned their faces toward him at once. He could see a line of hills in the distance, and beyond that, the faint dark where a mountain might sit and breathe smoke. He had chosen to carry a burden older than any charm he had ever met. He knew that the very act of bearing it would change him, and perhaps in time would change more than he intended. He walked on, the moonlight tasting metallic and strange still on his tongue, and the ring lay quiet for a while, as if listening to their footsteps and learning the measure of his heart. The air tasted of iron and rain, and the ring in Harry's palm was hotter than hearth-fire. It pulsed against his skin like something that knew his name, though his throat only made a dry, unbelieving sound. Around him the world held its breath. The pines were still. The river below went glass smooth between banks of stone, and a low wind came up from the east, as if some great thing were stirring in a sleep of many years. The ring hummed with a slow hunger. When he looked up, a shadow detached itself from the cloud-rack and flew. They came like knives sewn to the night, not birds, not wolves, but riders mounted on fleshless steeds, their faces hidden in darkness. The sound of their wings, if wings they had, was a blade through cloth. Horses reared and threw men to the ground. A hound bolted, limp and whimpering, from a leaping horse. One of the riders passed over the river, and the water shrank beneath him, running back into itself as though shy of his tread. A voice, not spoken aloud but threaded into the very edges of his hearing, said things the ring wanted him to hear. Promises of power, of home returned, of enemies made ash. Harry felt it like warmth at first, like the memory of hands that had once given him biscuits, and then like a pressure that cramped his lungs. He could taste smoke and pipeweed and old paper in his mouth. The ring wanted his hand to move, to slide itself upon a finger it had shaped for ages. Behind him, someone swore. The sound cut sharp as flint. A figure stepped from the trees, a man cloaked in brown, with eyes that took in the sky and measured the wind. He did not shout orders so much as ground them into the air. Others moved by him. A narrow line of archers slipped like shadow into the undergrowth, and an old man in gray, who had the air of having been anywhere there was need, lifted a staff and let fall a single silvery note that stung the ears like a bell. The Nazgul turned their heads as if they too had heard that note. A ripple of wind went out from them, and the very shadows leaned their heads toward the riders, tongues of black smoke uncoiling. One of the riders made a sound like metal tearing. He pointed at Harry. The horse beneath him seemed to surge forward, not with legs, but with will, as if the creature were a puppet of the dark. "No!" Harry said, though he did not fully know to whom he was speaking. The word came out ragged. His wand, unfamiliar in shape beneath his coat, felt suddenly like something heavy and true. He did not draw it as a boy at a duel might, with practiced motion. He craned his wrist and thrust it forward like a beacon. From its tip there came a bloom of light, green at first, then white as milk, then sharpened like a blade, and it cut between him and the closest rider. The light struck the thing, and there was a scream. Not a full human sound, but a scraping that set Harry's teeth on edge. The rider wavered as if struck, though no wound was seen. The horse reared, doubled, and then slid from between them as though its tether to the world had been cut. A spray of dark took it, and the river sighed and closed over the place it had occupied. "Keep it raised!" the brown-cloaked ranger barked. His voice was close now. Harry heard the rasp of his own breathing fall into time with someone else's. "The light will hold them, if they do not circle." "Not hold for long," the gray man said. The single note he had struck hung in the air like a thread. "They are drawn to the ring. Shield him." There was no surprise in those words, only the economy of someone who had been waiting for storms to gather. Harry, who had carried threats of a different kind through years of cramped cupboards and whispered warnings, felt something colder than the night press against his spine. The ring leered in his palm. It promised that he could give this cold a name and make it kneel. Arrows answered from the trees. They went like swallows into the dark, and each found its mark in the black cloaks of the riders. One of the riders reared and wrenched, the shadow about him fraying at the edges like old cloth. For a heartbeat, there was hope. Then the leader, the one that had turned its face toward Harry, thrust its head forward, and from under its hood came a sound like 1,000 people whispering at once. It was not a voice, perhaps, but memory made audible, and it curled into Harry's skull with a familiarity that was obscene. Names, faces, regrets he had not had began to crowd at the mouth of his mind. The smell of a cupboard, the bright glare of a platform, a sorting hat settling on his head. The ring was calling him home by 1,000 false doors. His hand tightened. Pain flared at the base of his scar, a quick electric jab. The dark speared deeper, and it took all of him not to bend his fingers and slip the ring onto that finger that had felt the wand so often. He thought of those he had loved and those he had lost. He thought of promises he had not yet kept. "Do not listen," the gray man cried. He moved like someone who would not be unlearned by battle. His fingers were a blur, and the staff sang a higher, keener note. Around them, the air thickened with small lights, like moths of flame, and they cut the riders as a net might cut through fog. The riders shrank back, unwilling or unable to touch the light. One of them crumpled into the river and was gone like breath. But 3 of them surged toward Harry, and the nearest slammed down out of the sky, blackness uncoiling in a wave. The ground trembled under its impact. The ranger leapt, blade flashing, and met it with a ringing clash that smelled of ozone. Harry, more by impulse than command, drove his wand into the fray like a thrust of lamp-feathered steel. Light spat against shadow. Flame and frost seemed to wrestle upon the very air. Out of the light came a small, sharp voice. "Not that," it snapped, one of the archers, a woman's voice, wired with iron. "Do not waste fire on things that serve the ring. Use the song." Her bow bent. She sang, low and fierce, and the string thrummed with a note that was no mere sound, but a bone-deep law. The Nazgul's heads turned. For a second, the nearest rider staggered as if something old and true had been recalled from him. Childhood, perhaps, or the memory of rain on a door. He swayed and could not find his feet. Harry found himself singing, though he did not know how the sound came. Words rose in him like leaves on water, half-elf song and half-thing of his own muttered syllables. The ring hissed at the sound and reared, but light and music braided around his fingers and made the dark staggers falter. The riders pulled back, half-scooped into the night, and began to circle as if testing the air for a weakness. It was then that a new presence made itself known, not a step taken nor a voice that might be tracked, but a weight as if countless eyes had turned toward them from far off. The river's surface went dull as pewter. The trees there shivered, and strangers of sap and leaf creaked like old men. From far to the south came a drum beat, a slow, measured pulse. Another drum answered from the east, and then from the west. The beat of them was not war only, it was history settling itself again into motion. "Look to the road," the ranger said. He did not make it a question. His eyes were fixed on the lane that led away from them, the lane that, in another life, had been trod by merchants and children and men who had grown old in peace. Now it ran like a nerve to the heart of the land, and at its mouth great riders were massing. Against the pale of the sky they were too many, and they rode as if the world had known only hunger. Harry swallowed. The ring wanted him to take it, to keep it, to wear it until the world bowed at his shoes. It whispered of answers it would give, of wounds it would seal. All the same, the face of the gray man, lined, patient, with loss gathered like old coins, looked at him with the kind of pity that comes from seeing a boy made soldier before his time. "We have no time to lose," the gray man said. "The road shall not be quiet until this passes. The ring draws armies. If it is to be moved, it must go where the dark cannot reach it. There is a place." He did not finish. The ranger spat his answer like gravel. The archers gathered their arrows. The drums did not stop. Harry's shoulders tightened as if under a cloak of some new, terrible responsibility. He had been found between two worlds, and in the skin of one he wore the symbol of another's undoing. He had felt the old temptations. He had seen the cost of giving in, even for mercy's sake. Around him his companions, worn, ready, and yet young, in a way that burnished his fear, looked to him because fate had chosen to lay its hand on him. "I will carry it," he said, not because his voice rang with bravado, but because something quieter and harder beneath his ribs had decided. It was not a vow made to the ring. It was a refusal offered to it, a small, bitter thing. He slid the band back into his pocket, the metal warm enough to make his hand sweat. The gray man nodded once as if answering to a plan that had been sketched in the stars. There was no cheering. There was only the sound of the wind and the drums and the distant possession of shadow. The Nazgul were gathering again, regrouping like wolves that had tasted blood. A line of riders was forming on the road, and the choice ahead was as clear as a blade, to move toward fire and to risk everything, or to stay and let their world twist into a shape they could not mend. Harry looked once more at the ring, and at the faces that stood in the failing light, and he felt with a clarity that was almost pain the shape of the path that lay before him. He could take it and walk into the belly of the West. He could hand it over and dissolve into whatever small mercy might remain. He could run. He did none of those things yet. Instead, he pulled his coat tighter and set his feet toward the lane where the riders had gathered, where smoke and movement made the horizon tremble. Around him, the company braced themselves, shoulders squared to the same indrawn breath. The drums beat louder. The Nazgul wheeled as one and came back to the hunt. Harry walked forward because not walking, he now understood, would be the same as yielding. He walked as the ring hummed, and as the world itself held fast against the pull. The first steps were the hardest. They tasted of iron and old bread, and a promise that was not yet kept. The shriek split the night as though a blade had found the seam of the world. Wind ran like cold water over the hill, and for a moment every living thing held its breath. Harry felt the ring grow heavy on his finger, not with weight, but with a pressure against thought itself, an insistence like a hand over the mouth. He wanted to pull it free. He wanted to press it to his ear and listen. Instead, he set his jaw and let his wand hang loose at his side. Gandalf's staff flared a pale blue, and the light fell into the black like an answered oath. His voice, low and urgent, routed the scattered confusion into shape. "Not here," he said quietly. "Not now." Aragorn moved beside them, boots laying quiet, claims upon the grass. He did not shout orders. His presence steadied the others as a mountain steadies the weather. From the valley below, the riders came, not so much riding as swooping upon the air. Their shapes were the absence of shape, cloaks that were not cloaks, and horses that had the sheen of too slick water. Each horse's breath was a gray plume, and the very air around them smelled of iron and old graves. One of the Nazgul turned its head and listened. Harry felt the ring's tug, a needle under his skin, and for an instant he imagined himself as small as a mouse, and no more noticed than a pebble. He had learned in other troubles how things that were not meant to be merged might need to be wrenched solid by will. He lifted his wand because it was the only thing he had. No spell of long study came to his hand, only words he had spoken in dormitories, in nightmares, and in hurried alleys. "Lumos!" he cried. The tip of his wand flamed like weld light, bright and white as new bone. The light did not simply illuminate, it attracted. It boiled the fog back like a finger through water. The Nazgul recoiled, shrieking anew as if the sound itself were scorched. Old magic met new there on the ridge, ring song and schoolyard charm, and neither fully comprehended the other. For a breathless moment, the witch hat of an enchantment fell sideways. The shadow that had been trailing them like a second skin hesitated. Gandalf's hand was at Harry's elbow. "Do not use more than that," he said, and for all the command in his tone, there was a father's tremor. "The ring hears all bright things. Keep it small." Harry swallowed and felt the ring answering, not with speech but with pictures. Memory visions unspooled at the edge of his mind, a cage of cold stone, the echoing rasp of a voice he had known in other lives, and an eye of vast hunger turning slow to find him. He wrenched his attention away and counted himself by the weight of his boots on the turf. Aragorn's sword sang once as he drew it. The steel color was a speech in itself, an old, blunt promise. He stepped forward, not to charge, but to stand between the Nazgul and the hill. "Hold," he said. The way he spoke made fighting seem a necessity of grief rather than joy. Behind him, the others, men and elves, and a few weary riders, whose faces were not fully seen by the light, closed ranks like a door. One of the riders detached itself and came nearer on soundless hooves, nearing as if to smell the ring upon the air. The great hood turned, and Harry saw not a skull, but a manifold of shadows beneath the cowl. A chill like spilled ink poured down the boy's spine. Something in him, an old, small, human stubbornness, reached for a joke to break the terror. He almost said, "Keep your hat on, creature." Instead, he held his breath and let the light do its work. He tried another charm, one of those soft bindings used in a bedroom to stitch a broken window. The words flowed from him, halting yet true, a thread of silver that laced itself around the Nazgul's cloak, catching like frost on cloth. The shadowing creature hissed. The thread sang and tightened. The Nazgul strove as if the world were made of ropes instead of air, and in that human grasping, Harry felt a terrible kinship. He had once bound a basilisk's gaze with a mirror. He had once coaxed light from a cupboard in the dark. He was a boy with small magics in a place used to slow, patient spells. The ring sensed the weakness and leaned in. Its voice was not a voice but a set of images offered like bait. Power, given simply, enemies folded inward like a map, the return of a shape that could close wounds and take names. Harry's fingers tightened around the band until his knuckles whitened. He began to speak aloud, and the sound of his own voice steadied him. "No," he said, not at the visions, but at the ring, at whatever hunger rode with it. "No." Beside him, a figure broke from the line, an elf, tall and narrow as an arrow. Her eyes glittered like winter rivers, and she moved with a grace the world had not been taught to interrupt. She raised a hand, and the night answered in leaves. A green wind rose, lifting the grasses and forcing the Nazgul back a step. The rider's shriek cut off like a snapped string. The elf's power was older than any wand chant, older than oath of man. It tasted of rain and roots, and the slow patience of stone. Gandalf watched her with something like relief folding out of his face. "Do you read her, Haran?" he asked, using a name that made the elf's shoulders lift in faint amusement. Her weaving hides us a little." Harry could not tell if Gandalf's gratitude was for the craft itself, or for the fact that an old kind of power was answering in a language the ring did not know. The respite was a small, brittle thing. From the west there came a sound like iron dragged across glass. Footsteps, not of feet, but of inevitability. A second wave of riders approached, and the very stars seemed to dim under their passage. Aragorn's gaze slid toward the west, where the land fell away into black, and the sky was a wash of indifferent light. He bent his head and spoke, low. "We cannot hold here. The ring will call the shadow. We must go where it is weakest, the water, the deep places." Harry felt the suggestion like a plank thrown across a chasm. His heart beat against the metal on his finger. The ring, for all its soft whispering, had made itself very present in the blood beneath his skin. To move it toward the water, toward deep, shifting places, was to tempt what lay beyond those rides and voices. Yet staying meant the Nazgul could circle and starve them like a wolf pack, and he had seen what Long Watch did to courage. "Can the river hide us?" he asked. His voice was thin, young, used to being the last resort. He had never stood where men of the West decided fate by such weighty measures. Aragorn looked at him then, and the man's face was not unkind. "The water may hide sound and sight," Aragorn said. "It cannot hide the scent of the ring forever, but it gives different ways to tread." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. The old grey was not content with mere pathwork. His mind turned with gears that had the smell of thunder. "The ring must not be brought near fire of the strong or the mouths of kings," he murmured. "It is a thing that loves light for making itself known. Water muffles." He glanced at Harry, and for the first time the wizard's voice softened into something like simple counsel. "There are places where old eyes look less quickly. There are currents that do not bear memory. We will choose them." The Nazgul answered with a shriek that was more question than command. It was as if the world itself reported the inquiry of the ring down into its dark channels. "Where is he? Who holds me?" The sound pulled at bones, and it made small children flinch in their sleep. Harry felt the ring quiver like a hunted bird, wanting to fly. They moved as one then, not because they were forced to, but because necessity had rendered their wills to the same slope. Horses and feet trod the path that leaned toward the river. The air grew wetter the nearer they drew, and with it came a sound that was not quite wind, water sighing against stone, small and patient and full of old knowledge. Harry walked with his wand drawn but unused, the ring heavy with suppressed motion. Each step seemed to peel back a layer of some other life, memories that were not his, cities burning, a voice saying, "Your name, your true name," and the sensation of standing above a circle of others who had bent and sworn. He pressed his palm to the cold metal, feeling its warmth like a pulse, and he promised himself then and there that he would not let it dictate his choices. They came at last to the river that Gandalf had named in a phrase so old that even the water answered. It widened there into a pool, and the surface was like a sheet of glass melted and quickly cooled, flawless and malevolent in its stillness. Trees leaned over it, their roots like hands that groped for secrets. Frogs blinked, untroubled by the designs of powerful men. The Nazgul halted at the river's edge, their hoods low. They did not cross water lightly. Aragorn set his hand on the pommel of his sword and looked at Harry. "We cannot carry the ring in our arms and ask the river to forget," he said. "If we are to use the water, it must be to undo the call, not to hide it." Harry nodded, because nodding was the only honest thing available. He could feel the weight of choice settle on him like a mantle, prickly but real. The ring thrummed, impatient, and for the first time he considered a course so dangerous it tasted of iron and courage, to let the water touch the ring, to test what the old currents would show and whether some of the ring's song might be muffled there. Gandalf's voice was suddenly sharp. "Prepare yourselves. If this fails, we will have only one road left." He did not smile. He did not promise miracles. He moved with the authority of one who had stood before terrible doors and seen them open. They formed a small circle by the water. The trees bent closer as if eavesdropping. The Nazgul watched from the other bank, inconceivable in their patience. Harry felt every heart in that ring measure his courage and his failure by the same standard. He slid his fingers under the ring's rim, feeling the cold give to the warm, and then, with the slow care of a man laying a child to bed, he drew the band from his finger. It should have felt like victory or surrender, but it felt like stepping onto another shore. The ring's face caught the moon and set it to bleeding silver into his palm. It whispered one last promise, of names taken back, of closed wounds, of a place where he could be wanted and loved and unafraid. Harry tightened his hand. He turned it toward the water, and for a heartbeat, longer than an oath, the world held its breath with him. Then he set the ring upon the surface, as one might lay a small boat upon a pond. The circle of water accepted it without fanfare. The ring floated like a coin, and for a moment the moon tied itself into the metal, and 1,000 faint echoes ran from the center outward. The Nazgul's cry broke that moment, as if something besides sound had been cut. The river shivered, and Harry, whose life had been a series of choices made under lantern light and under threat, realized that he had done something neither wholly brave nor wholly sure. He had begun an experiment on the line between worlds, and the outcome was not yet revealed. He stood there, palms damp, and knew the danger had only shifted shape. The river might muffle or magnify. The Nazgul might hunger or be turned. Behind him, footsteps gathered, and a plan was already forming in the minds around him like coiled rope. In front of him, the ring lay on the water, small and luminous, and the world leaned in to hear what would come next. The night had a way of listening in that place, as if the very dark bent its ear to whatever thought dared to speak. A thin wind threaded the pines and brought with it the smell of ash and iron. Beside the low fire, his fingers curled until the gold lay warm against his palm, and the world narrowed to the weight of it, and the itch beneath his skin where two worlds had once touched. The ring hummed like a throat that wanted to sing. Harry drew breath and found the sound came first as a small, old ache behind his scar. Then a word, half remembered, like a spell heard in a dream. Gandalf moved without hurry, but there was steel in his step now. "Do not let it speak to you," he said. His voice was small against the night, but it struck the hushed trees. "Hear its music. Do not answer with your own." Harry felt the urge to answer anyway. The ring's voice was not one voice, but 1,000 threads at once, promising precisely what a boy who had known fear would buy with a single moment of weakness, safety from enemies, the answers he had never been sure he deserved, the faces of those lost made steady. It did not speak of victory. It spoke of indifference dressed as mercy. It called the heart to sidestep danger, to fold the world soft around itself. He tested himself with a spell that had no future here, and yet felt natural, an old charm for light, a small flare of lumos. The flame of the camp rose solid, white as a star, and the ring blinked away from the fire as if stung. For a breath, the tug that had been pulling at his mind loosened. He smiled, and the smile was brittle with relief. Then the cry came from the marshlands to the east, an elongated keening that chopped the night into ragged pieces. Horses lifted their heads and snorted. A hound began a slow, trembling howl. The ranger, who had been keeping watch, sprang to his feet. "Ring wraiths," he said, and where his voice fell, a frost seemed to pass across the air. They had expected many things that night: the mournful chase of men across the plain, the roar of orcs under a black banner. They had not expected the sudden, all-at-once presence that made breath taste metallic in the mouth, like iron struck on iron. Even before the riders could be seen, the world grew quieter, as if sound itself retreated from their approach. Harry felt it then more sharply than before. The scar flared not with pain, but with a recognition older than his life. It was a small, hot needle at the base of his skull, and with it came a memory not his own. A candle blown out in a room where someone had whispered promises and given their name to a darkness. The ring hummed a harmony to that memory and sought to braid itself into it. Gandalf's hand fell on Harry's shoulder, firm, not unkind. "Do not look for it in the dark," he murmured. "It will show you what you fear seeking. Keep your eyes on the real path." The hillock where they sheltered was low and ringed by scrub. On the far side, a copse of stunted oaks caught the faint starlight like a web. Across that shadow the riders came, tall and thin in the saddle, cloaked in a shroud of night that pooled about their mounts. They carried no torches, but where they passed, the bark of trees seemed to darken, and from them came a chill that crept upon the marrow. The leader raised something pale and thin, an outstretched hand perhaps, or the metal of a blade, and the whole world leaned toward its point. The hobbit, who had been sitting cross-legged near the fire, a small, wide-faced watcher, stood as if the cry had been a bell. His hands, usually quick with small comforts and the stirring of stew, trembled now. "They smell it," he whispered, a sound that might have been brave if the words had not creaked. "Yes," said the ranger, and his mouth closed like a trap. "They find the breath that carries the fate." Harry could feel the ring like a second heart. It wanted to be seen. It wanted the riders to see it and to come. That thought made bile rise bitterly. He hated the knowing that he held a thing other men coveted. He hated the way fear rose under his skin like frost. He also, suddenly and with childish clarity, wanted neither to hand it over nor to carry the cost alone. He lifted his wand, not outward, but as if to point the light inward, toward himself. A hum built in the wood like bees about to rise. The ring screamed, not with words, but with a tight little sound, high and afraid. It tried then, subtly, to twist whatever magic he sent, like a river turning the edge of a stone to redirect a current. Harry felt the tug and tightened his jaw. He would not let it. The first rider broke from the line like a spill of ink. When his shadow fell upon them, the air became a pressure that shoved at the lungs. The horse beneath him snorted, foam flecking bright against the dark. From beneath the ridged helm there was no face to read, but a shape of emptiness where one should be. And from that, nothing came the sound of a voice without mouth, a rasping like wind through bone. Gandalf stepped forward, his staff slamming the ground. The strike scattered motes of light like dandelion seeds. There was a chord of ancient power that rose from the staff, low and strong, and the rider lurched as if struck. White letters of flame curled up and ran along the rider's cloak, but the fire did not stay. Something dark in the cloak drank the light instead of melting. "Back!" Gandalf said, and his voice was a command that made the hairs along Harry's arms bristle. The companions tightened in a half-circle. Bowstrings drew taut, blades flashed. The ranger's blade, long and honed, whispered as it left its sheath. But the ring was not idle. When the rider nearest them turned, he looked not at Gandalf, but at Harry. The void within that helm drank, and for a horrid moment Harry thought the rider could see the shape of his soul. The ring clenched like a fist around that small, naked fear and used it as a wedge. Harry did the first thing that occurred to him, and only later would he understand why. He called one clear, intrusive word in all the languages that had nested inside him, and none of them particularly Middle-earth. It was a spell of defense he had learned as a boy, when danger was nearer than grown men thought it should be, a push of force cast with a hand, and a word that meant go. The sound hit the rider and the horse together like a physical shove. The creature reeled, a tangle of limbs and protest. The rider's cloak rippled like oil on water. For a second, the dark that filled him thinned. The horse threw its head, and its rider, unmoored from that fierce hunger, slumped. His helm clattered on the ground, and there, like a piece of old bone, a pale hooded skull remained, hollow and guileless as a shell. The thing writhed and shrank away from Harry's light, the dark along its shoulders flaking like cured tar. For an instant, hope spilled out of the circle like a warm, bright thing. The companions barked and laughed in the way survival makes one laugh, short, metallic, not joyful. The hobbit's fingers tightened on his blade. Then more riders closed. They did not rush in a stampede. They came as if the very night itself had massed to swallow a hill. Their horses were like ships without sails cutting a black sea. The ranger bellowed an order and arrows flew. They hissed from the bowstrings and thudded against cloaks, and some stuck fast in the leather as if the riders wore logos of iron. Blood there was not to see. Wherever an arrow struck, it was merely as if the dark had been given a stitch to pull. One rider only uttered a sound that might have been pain, and even that turned into laughter that no face could own. Gandalf's eyes were like flint now. He lifted his staff again, and the ground answered. A column of light flared and set the grass to silver. The riders shrank back from it with a sound like wind through holed rock. The one who had been nearest Harry lay prone, the ring of his cloak thrumming like a snared bell. The ring hummed back, jealous and fiery. It tried to make that flat sound into a promise. Give me the power to unmake them. Put the magic in his hand, in his heart. Be lord of both fear and release. The voice was very soft. It moved like a hand skimming an old scar. Something in Harry burned against that soft voice. It was not merely the scar or the memory of loss. It was the echo of a different kind of fight. The knight behind King's Cross, a small, dying thing that had needed him to be brave once, and been brave enough to trust him. He thought, with childish stubbornness, that he could not betray that smallness by taking what would let him avoid the cost of courage later. He could not, he thought, hand himself over to a whisper that promised an end to all pain. He gripped the ring until his knuckles hurt. "Think on what you would become," Gandalf said to the ring more than to Harry. "Do you believe the world would kneel and keep you unbroken?" There was a moment of silence, like a held breath between two storms. Then someone in the line, an elf, thin and quiet, with a face like a sliver of moon, launched an arrow so true it split a blade of grass. It struck a rider's helm and sent up a ringing peal that was not wholly music nor wholly metal. The dark around that rider quivered and then faded like steam before a sun. The battle was neither long nor grand, but it was enough to teach a lesson on that hill. They held the ringed circle and forced the riders to pass. The last of them drifted away into the folds of night, as if the world swallowed them back whole. When they were gone, the quiet returned, but it had been altered, as if the land itself had inhaled and found the air different. The hobbit sagged to the ground and laughed, a small dry thing. The ranger ran a hand through hair gone white with sweat. Gandalf lowered his staff and leaned upon it. His face was grave and oddly gentle. "You used what you have," he said to Harry. "You used a witch's trick most call childish. Yet you also tasted what the ring offers and did not eat it. That is a choice that will carve days." Harry wanted to say something brash, some bold vow that would sound like a turning of a tale. Instead, he drew a long breath and let it out like a thing he had been holding since he was small. The ring lay heavy and patient in his palm. Around them the night waited. The path ahead was a black thread stitched through a field of coals, and at its end a thing that had birthed a darkness. "I will not let it steal another face," he said at last. The words felt fierce and young and not quite enough. "I will take it where it can be ended." The silence that followed held the weight of the mountain they would cross. In the flicker of embers, Gandalf's eyes glinted with a sorrow that was older than the trees. No single voice gave assent, but none argued. The hobbit rubbed a hand over his mouth and then nodded as if this decision sat as bitter and noble in his mouth as a knife. The ranger drew his blade and rested its point against the earth. The elf watched the sky, as if reading a weather for the soul. Harry slid the ring inside his pocket and fastened the flap with trembling fingers. The warmth within it was gone for now, replaced by a cold, as if the little gold had grown seasickness. He stood, feeling the land beneath his boots, as if it were a ledger keeping the count of every step. "We move at dawn," Gandalf said. "The roads will thin, the doors will narrow. Come what winds bring, we go." Harry swallowed and felt the taste of iron on his tongue. He was no hero of old songs. He was a boy who had been plucked between two worlds and tasked with keeping a thing that wanted to be kept. He could feel, in that small, stubborn place in his chest, the shape of an intent settling like a stone. It was not yet resolution. It was not victory. It was simply a step chosen among many bad steps. When the first gray of morning bled at the edges of the sky, they rolled their cloaks and set out. The wind had died, and with it a certain innocence. Behind them the hills shrank, and the dark opened to plains that smelled of smoke. Ahead, the land rose toward a ridge that the map marked with an obdurate ancient name. Harry kept his hand in his pocket where the ring lay, as if to remember its coolness, and, as his boots found the path, his mind reached for the shape of what must be done.